welcome to this next episode of the Power Up podcast. Now, in this podcast today, we are going to talk about the surprising truth about confident people. Mainly the fact that, well, maybe they're not quite as confident as you think they are.
Perceptions can be deceiving.
Indeed. And in fact, they could be experiencing just as much anxiety as the next person. Mm-hmm. The big difference being is they've got coping strategies for dealing with it, and it doesn't put them into a position where they don't take action. So on the surface, it looks like, on a stage, a performer, an actor, broadcaster, confident leader, so-called person at the office who seems to be bubbly and full of themselves. Well, the reality is that quite often underneath all that persona and charisma, there's still feelings of anxiety going on. And they've just learned to be able to control it and be able to deal with it so that it doesn't stop them doing what they want to do. Remember, this podcast is all about powering you up to do the things you really want to do, live the life you really want. And so we're going to share some ideas on what these people are doing and some really core coping strategies. A big part of actually doing this particular podcast is because it's come to our attention that it's far more prevalent than perhaps we first might realise. And it can be so debilitating that it stops people being themselves, following their dreams, doing what they want to do.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually quite a lonely thing to experience as well. I think that people feel, because it is such an internal thing, people feel like they're the only one.
Absolutely.
We're here to bust that myth and to explore, like you say, some strategies to help people understand and manage. You can't actually get rid of thoughts of anxiety, but you absolutely can take steps so that they don't control your life and what you do day to day.
I think that's a very important point. It's not about necessarily eliminating it completely. If you are a person that tends to be of a more anxious disposition, it's easier, I guess, for some people who don't get particularly anxious. I'm not a particularly anxious individual, but I do know people quite close to me that are.
Are they sitting in the same room as you?
Right. And so, so I do appreciate that it is, and I have three kids, and some of them, I've definitely suffered with some quite acute anxiety. And in fact, all three of them have actually to a certain point, but they've been able to deal with it and better self-regulate themselves. So yes, whilst I don't necessarily get those feelings. I would say that I did many, many years ago, but I've done a lot of work on myself and hopefully got better coping strategies. But just generally, I would say hands up, I'm not a person that is necessarily engulfed with a lot of anxiety all of the time. So it's easier in a way, perhaps for people that don't suffer from anxiety, just to think that, well, what's the big deal?
Pull yourself together,
crack on, get on with it. But actually, no. In the work that I do, I realise that it's not as simple as that.
Yeah. So a useful place to start, I think, is to actually clarify what anxiety is, particularly if there's people that don't know whether they suffer from it. But I think
if this thing I've got anxiety or what is it? Yeah.
But basically, what anxiety is a feeling of apprehension that is present, sometimes irrespective of the presence of an actual stressor itself. So it's something, generally tends to be about things that might happen in the future, and your brain starts telling you a story and creating the fear of a situation that has not happened and might not even happen. So it's like an anticipation of a future event,
so it's
and
not
a fear gets
necessarily
attached to that.
So it's not necessarily in response to an event or trigger necessarily.
Well, I mean, things do trigger it. For example,
Exactly. Yeah.
if you were to be asked to do a speech, or something like that.
Go to a social event.
Go to a social event and
Yeah.
have to speak to a big group of people, or, you know, be in a crowded place. And, you know, so it is more the pictures and the image and the vision that you play in your mind, and the thoughts that you play in your that go through your mind, that actually creates the stress associated with what that might be like.
But what also I think we're saying here is that it doesn't necessarily need a triggering event.
No.
You could just be feeling anxious.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Well, I mean, generalized anxiety disorder is a very real thing, and anxiety about specific things can easily develop into generalized anxiety disorder. You start being anxious about something specific,
and then
before you know, anxiety has taken over.
Yeah.
If unchecked, is taken over.
Yeah.
All, you know, you just always have that slight feeling of unease.
And it is, you know, I mean, the times I have had it, you know, you really do feel it, don't you? In your, well, for me certainly in my stomach. It sits heavy, and it's not a nice feeling. It's not a great feeling at all. No. The good news is there are a plethora of different techniques that, as you say, doesn't necessarily, you know, going to remove it or eliminate it, but 100% they will definitely reduce it.
Yeah, and the other, well, I mean, good news, i.e. that you're not alone, is that, you know, 30% of people, you know, there's loads of research done about this, and 30% of people actually experience these feelings. So it's, you're not alone in it, you know, and there is a load of research and work and you know, that have developed into techniques that are available to help manage it.
So we're battling with, you know, a part of the brain, as we know as the amygdala, which is responsible for regulating, you know, emotions.
Yeah.
It's, you know, an extreme case. People have heard of probably the term amygdala hijack, where the amygdala literally hijacks the brain, and suddenly you're rendered of any sort of rational thought. Instead, you're now in a very emotional place, having a very emotional reaction.
Yeah.
But before you get to that point, where it's an extreme event like that, you know, you're battling with this feeling with your emotions, and your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for more rational thinking, is being kind of almost overtaken. And it's, you know, it's like your rational brain is not winning the game here.
I mean, essentially what we're fighting against here is a very, you know,
primitive system
that was designed to keep us safe. You know, back in the time where you had to be on the lookout for danger and fight, you know, impending threat.
Yeah.
It was a very useful system to have.
The saber-toothed tiger, etc. Yeah.
Exactly. But now, you know, how that's transpired, and over time, as we have evolved in our own lives as well, things that may have started off as a threat initially have then developed in our minds as something that can be, you know, very triggering in terms of an anxiety response.
And we experience it in a very real way, don't we? You know, we increased body temperature, increased heartbeat, increased, you know, you really feel it physically. It sits very heavy in the stomach. You're experiencing that emotion in a very, very physical way. Yeah. Now, the good news is, in a way, is that partly, as you said before, Lisa, nothing necessarily has actually happened. You're not actually under any threat. If we're experiencing something at a physical level, we're manifesting a feeling in the pit of our stomach, we're experiencing a
butterfly feeling,
butterflies or increased heart rate. The fact that's actually happening, but nothing is actually happening physically to you, that means that we can reverse it. Yeah. We can change it. Yeah. We can actually do something with our mind and with our body to change that feeling. Yeah. But you've got to be you've got to be deliberate, and you've got to be very proactive with it. Yeah, absolutely. As well as the physical symptoms that we experience, there's also emotional and cognitive symptoms as well. So emotionally, you might, you know, experience thoughts of impending doom or excessive worry, and then cognitively that affects your ability to actually think straight and, like you say, engage that more rational area of your brain. And in the short term,
you know, it is a protective mechanism, so it can actually be very useful. It's there to protect us from danger. But if it's in reaction to situations where there is no present danger and we leave it unchecked, then over time that can lead to, as I said before, things like more general anxiety disorder, which obviously has very limiting impacts in terms of our ability to perform.
So coming back to our earlier point, and just to reinforce it, that one of the biggest misconceptions is that confident people do not experience anxiety. However, the truth is they do. For some, possibly even greater. I mean, the bigger the stage, potentially, the bigger the anxiety, the bigger the expectation, the bigger the audience, the greater the anxiety can kick in.
Yeah.
You don't see that anxiety. What you see is this glossy, fantastic, performance. But I think there's been plenty well-noted examples of people in the public eye that experience extreme or levels of anxiety.
I mean, Robbie Williams is a really good example. He's performing in London at the moment.
Yeah.
And he famously describes anxiety and the battles that he's had as a torturous headlock that he has had to...
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's pretty...
Yeah.
You know, it's a pretty good description.
And you wouldn't necessarily see him as being anxious, would you, on the outside?
No, but the good thing is people like him and you know, there's many other performers and politicians and actors that
Stephen Fry talks about it. I mean, I guess it's an English example, but Stephen Fry talked a lot about it, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. And Prince Harry and Harry and William started the foundation, didn't they, specifically around mental health. So I think it is
Adele,
definitely,
people like the famous singer Adele as well, etc.
Yeah, and I think them talking about it is really helpful because it opens up the conversation and helps people realise that they're not alone and there are other sufferers and they can.
And that's the point. It is really what we're trying to make here. It's just to normalise it as part of life. What you don't want to do is to allow your anxiety to reach a level where it just prevents you from doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
Or enjoying the things you love to do.
Yeah.
But just recognise it is a normal. It is a normal bodily human function.
Yeah, and
right?
it's an alarm. You know, it's an alarm system, isn't it? And I read a great thing yesterday where it was saying it's a bit like a smoke alarm. If a smoke alarm goes off, you don't remove the smoke alarm.
No.
And you know, it wouldn't be very wise to remove the smoke alarm, but you look for the source and you try and manage whatever situation you're presented with. And it's a little bit like that with anxiety. You can't remove the system because it is there and it's part of who we are as human beings, but you can take steps to address some of the things that are causing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's look at some strategies then for overcoming this anxiety and to allow ourselves, you know, to have that little bit more confidence. When people say, I wish I just didn't have, I wish I had a little bit more confidence, probably what they're wishing for is less anxiety.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And that's the point I guess we're trying to make here. Because if you weren't with anxiety, you would naturally feel more confident.
Yes.
But so number one, let's just accept it. It's a normal part of human life. It's greater in the presence of where there is a bigger stage, where you're stepping outside your comfort zone, where you're likely to potentially be judged. All these things are, it's more likely that it's going to have greater presence in those moments.
Although even that is relative, isn't it? You know, because what might seem like a normal stage to me might be going down the pub and speaking to a group of people. For some, that might be main stage at Glastonbury. So it is relative, I think. But I think that the important thing to start with is just sort of check in with yourself and just recognise some of those situations that maybe do cause, you know, anxiety in you and not to try and eliminate it, but just sort of like sit with those feelings, because you can't actually eliminate them. You can only turn the dial down. And as we've said a lot of times, you know,
I've heard of this concept of sort of being the observer of yourself.
Yeah. Distance yourself from
distance yourself from it. It's almost like there I go again. I'm having that feeling, as opposed to just sitting heavy with you.
Yes.
If you can kind of sit out of yourself and observe yourself, and you can observe yourself for what it is.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's just anxiety. I'm in no danger. There is no real danger. You know, my son, he suffers from I'm getting slightly better now, but social anxiety, thought of walking into a crowded pub or a party.
Yeah, that's very common, isn't it?
No one's going to hurt him. No one's going to be of any danger. But it's a manifested feeling as a result of, as you say, of what potentially might happen, or putting myself in a situation where I might not feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be an observer of it, that in a way is the very, very, very first step to starting to progress and reducing that feeling.
Yeah. I think the second thing is then challenging this, because essentially what we're doing in our minds is telling ourselves a story about what might happen. So I think the next thing is actually to challenge the stories that we are telling ourselves. You know, is this true? We've talked before about Byron Katie's work and her brilliant questions. You know, very simply, is this true?
Can you know that it's
Can
absolutely
you
true?
know that it's absolutely true? And who would you be without that thought?
Yeah.
Really helps you, you know, challenge the story that you're telling yourself that is leading to these feelings of anxiety.
Because we do tend to, when we're in that anxious state, we do tend to describe the situation as if it is true, as if it's real. They won't like me, I won't be okay. What happens if they reject me? They're going to reject me. I'm not going to be liked. I'm not going to be accepted. There's going to be brighter people there. There's going to be smarter people, etc., etc. And these, of course, are all untruths, but we're describing them to ourselves as if it is a truth.
Yeah. It's funny, actually. Tilly, my youngest daughter, said to me, I mean, she's outwardly a pretty confident girl, isn't she? You don't sort of feel like too much bothers her. And so she was working in the cafe she works in yesterday, and all of the other staff went upstairs, and she was, you know, left in the garden serving the tables. And she, because we were talking about anxiety last night, and she said to me, it's weird, you know, it did pop into my head, what if they're all talking about me? But do you know what she said quite quickly? She said, but, you know, I've often thought that, you know, when she's at school and that, she's often had that feeling. But she says to herself straight away, don't be so stupid, of course they're not.
Yeah. Well, probably in her case, I'm sure if they're talking about it, it'd be great anyway.
Yes. I was quite surprised. That's an example of someone who is young and quite outwardly confident. Actually, she still experiences those thoughts.
When you're caught up in that little trap of, you know, taking something, potentially starting to catastrophize in our head, playing out, you know, the what-if scenarios, what if. These are all illusions or manifestations of something that may or may not happen.
Yeah.
That isn't true. I've heard this sort of term described that when you go backwards in time, it can feel depressing. And when you go forward in time, then you feel anxious. But in the current moment, if you can stay present, completely present, nothing is happening.
Yeah.
And if you can get yourself out of going forward and backwards, it's a very, you know, practices of mindfulness, for example, that's what mindfulness is really at its heart. I think, you know, we did that great podcast with Paul Dalton. If you can stay present, if you can stay in the moment, there is no feeling.
Nothing is harm.
And then you relieve yourself of it.
Yeah.
I was telling you earlier, I've been doing this Qigong practice, and that's all about noticing your energy and, you know, pushing away sort of negative feelings. But it's always about coming back to the present moment.
Yeah.
And it's very, very powerful, incredibly. I mean, it's just, as we said earlier, when you feel anxious, you are doing something that is creating that feeling. You weren't meant to be anxious. You're not designed to be anxious. Yes, we have a system that will create anxiety in relation to a set of circumstances or fear, but we're not meant to. As I was saying to someone the other day, actually I was thinking of having a conversation with my son. I said, look, you know, you've lived with this so long, you get to a point where you accept it as being part of who you are. And you don't, I want you to know that you don't need, that's not necessarily something that has to be like that. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to say that people who are listening to this who have anxiety, you shouldn't have it.
No.
I'm not saying that, but you do have to remind yourself the thing you're experiencing needn't be there for the rest of your life, because you can get caught up in a trap going, I'm an anxious person. That is who I am. And I will always be that way.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Because you are not your thoughts.
No.
They are created
Exactly.
by you through a different set of thoughts. And that's, when we come on to the techniques, that's absolutely something that you can do.
So can we perhaps change perspective by asking ourselves different questions? As reframing has always been a very powerful, technique. What else could this mean?
Yeah, if I wasn't anxious in this situation, how might I view this, the situation? And also looking at, the question that we mentioned earlier, how do I know it's true? Actually write these things down and write you could even have two sides of the paper, evidence for, evidence against. And when you actually see that helps distance yourself from the trigger as well.
Well, I've seen people from my own eyes. You literally see, you do a measure of anxiety. Where are you now? 8 out of 10.
Yeah.
A few minutes later, you're having a conversation like the way you're describing, writing these things down. Is that actually true? Can you know it to be 100% true? And they start changing the story. And as they change the story, suddenly the anxiety has gone from an 8 to a 6 already.
Yeah.
We haven't even got to any kind of coping or different techniques to calm the physiological body down, but just cognitively straight away, we're changing our feelings of anxiety.
There's a different spotlight, on it. I can remember once that I was skiing, and Matt and I had been doing black runs, no problem. We're both pretty confident skiers, and we've been absolutely doing black runs, no problem, when it was just Matt and I. When the girls were with us, I literally lost my ability to go down the run because I was just so petrified that the girls were going to hurt themselves. So I stopped. And it was, I had to completely, change my perspective on things, that the girls being there didn't mean that I couldn't ski or had to stop to keep everyone safe.
But you manifested it. That's the point.
Exactly.
You created that feeling in your own mind.
For something that I'd happily done, So it's just changing the spotlight and where your thoughts are going. That, really helps to shift the perspective in terms of that.
So the key thing we're really suggesting here is that if in that moment you can stop, almost say, how am I doing this? How am I creating this feeling? What am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I thinking about? What am I picturing? What am I telling myself? What story am I telling myself? What am I stating to be true that actually is not a truth? It's just a story.
What are other ways of looking at this?
Yeah,
absolutely.
et cetera. Just the challenge is we get so trapped in that, locked in that anxious feeling, we don't necessarily want to do these things. It's weirdly a comfort in holding on to the fear, because then it stops you actually moving towards the thing. That's the weird thing. I don't go down the mountain, I won't hurt myself, so I'll stay here. If I don't go and do the speech, if I don't put my hand up, I don't volunteer, I don't go to the social event, then I won't have to confront it.
But that is absolutely not the thing to do. Avoidance of these situations is not a strategy, because what it does is over time, it might give you relief in the first, in the short term, but in the long term, it strengthens that old neural pathway. It will be harder to break
Absolutely, Each time you don't go to a social event, or each time you don't speak up in a meeting, you come out of it safe, you go, right, that worked. That worked. And then you become convinced, as you said, you're not your thoughts, but you can become convinced you are. So let's look at, why don't you start off, Lisa, talking us through some of the things we can do to calm the threat response.
The first feeling is to not try and eliminate it. Actually, as we said before, sit with it and just recognise that it's just, a feeling. And rather than try and battle with it, just recognise, there I go again, and just sit with it and let it pass over, rather than trying to fight against it. That's the
Makes
first thing.
Makes sense, yeah. Of course, I think it's well known the power of breath, the power of breathing. It's such a strong physiological tool to use that any level of, if we think about anxiety tends to get associated with breathing very high in the chest. And if you look at when we feel most relaxed, we have very strong, full diaphragm breathing. So therefore, if we deliberately and intentionally use diaphragm breathing, where we breathe in through the nose, fill up the diaphragm, really feel you're filling up the space, really feel you're filling up the space, then pause, and then breathe out through pursed lips and elongate that outward breath. Something known as box breathing, people may be familiar with, the sort of 4-4-4 technique.
Yeah.
Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. There are variations on the theme. If anybody's heard anything slightly different to this, generally that slightly longer outward breath tends to work a little bit better.
Yeah.
Andrew Huberman talks a lot about the power of breath.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and the
check out his
physiological side.
Well, the physiological sigh, he's very, I mean, he's we can put a link into that and watch him talking about the physiological sigh, and he'll explain in detail, specifically, how neurologically that actually works.
Yeah. And basically it's mimicking relaxation to send a signal to the brain that there is no threat and you are relaxed.
I mean, you think about what a sigh is. A sigh is a sign of relaxation. Flop on the sofa, flop on the chair. It's calming. It's calming. So he will explain how this sort of the physiological sigh is a deliberate sigh you do with an intake of breath and then a slightly pause and then a slightly deeper intake of breath and then letting that out. So
you get to the top and then you go up again.
Up again, and it absolutely works. I think I've talked about this in another podcast. After hearing that, not long after hearing that, there was a situation going on in the family. I wasn't feeling very good about something, and our brains have a habit of waking us up in the middle of the night just to remind you that something is a little bit adrift. And of course, then once you're wide awake with that thought, buzzing around in your head, there's nothing else to distract you other than lying in your bed in darkness.
Yeah,
and it's playing around in your head. I tried this little technique, set up in my in the bed, and did this physiological sigh, and it worked really, really well. Could feel the feelings reducing, and then got back to sleep again. So definitely check that out and try it.
Yeah, and I think another important thing to talk about is the role of exercise as well. Exercise obviously produces endorphins, which beautifully counteract the cortisol and adrenaline that is caused in moments of anxiety. So whilst, in the moment, exercise and vigorous exercise can be really useful to address a anxious or stressful situation, it is a very good long-term strategy to build regular exercise and being out in nature and all of the things that give you endorphins to counteract
the production of endorphins,
the chemical situation that's going on.
Yeah, we talked about this before. Your chemistry, and you've got all these free pharmaceuticals available to you.
Yeah.
But you've got to trigger them.
Yeah.
What you're left unattended, what your brain is doing is producing more cortisol.
Yeah.
And so it will override your body, override your system. Whereas if you do these deliberate things, what you're actually doing is triggering the release of a different brain chemical, which will have a different impact, which is what you're describing here. There's a great technique called EFT tapping, and I don't know if anybody the listeners have heard of this, but if you haven't, the EFT tapping technique it's a crazy thing, because what you're basically doing, you're literally physically tapping different parts of your body on, I think it's like the meridian points.
Yeah.
So tapping on your wrists, on the inside of your forefinger, under your chin, under your eyes. There's different points. You need to get some instructions on it specifically. But whilst you're tapping and you continue this tapping technique, and then you take a measure ahead of time, where you're on a scale of 1 to 10, and then do it afterwards, you'll find plenty of people describing it and actually taking you through the technique.
Yeah.
I'm doing one at the moment with Paul McKenna, where he explains it very, very well.
And does tapping release tension, or it activates?
It just reduces.
Both,
I mean,
I guess.
I'm not an expert in this area, but I've seen it done before.
Yeah, I've seen loads.
I've
of
experienced it several times. All I know is that it's scientifically proven now to reduce anxiety, feelings of anxiety, and it's a great technique for doing it. It seems a bit bizarre. Some people are a little bit, well, tapping, how's that going to work? You can take some drugs if you want, right?
Yeah.
Or you can tap into the drugs you've already got, which are naturally occurring.
Yeah.
That's the
I
point.
know which I'd prefer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so triggering these brain chemicals, better feeling brain chemicals, by using these techniques. The body is a great device for self-healing. We just got to know how to operate the body. So do check out EFT.
Yeah, we'll put
tapping.
the link in.
And honestly, it's amazing. I've literally watched somebody reduce to happy tears from feeling anxious right in front of me. And when I've done it myself, you can feel the feelings just dissipate and go away. So actually, if you're in a really anxious state, that's the time to test it, because often these things you're practicing them when you're not actually feeling anxious.
Yeah, so you can't feel
So you don't really see the
impact.
benefit. But wow, when you've got someone in an anxious state and they do it, it's really incredible.
I think the final thing to mention around some of the strategies for calming the threat response is the crucial role that sleep plays as well. You know, I've got this Whoop strap now, which, and one of the things that I track most closely.
Just saying.
Yeah, mine's bigger. One of the things that I track most closely is my sleep.
Yeah.
And it is amazing that, you know, actually tracks what your sleep debt is over a period of time as well, and the quality of your sleep. It is something that I had just taken for granted, you know, before. But since getting a little bit older and experiencing more broken sleep, I really wanted to try and get a handle on it and think about the things that are affecting the quality of my sleep. And it makes a massive difference to how you feel day to day. So if you're faced with a situation that may be a trigger for anxiety and you are sleep deprived, it's going to have an exacerbating effect. So, you know, paying attention to your sleep is another critical tool.
I think it's the more I read around, listen to and read literature around sleep. Yeah. Certainly when I was younger, I sort of dismissed it as not being particularly important. I guess what we often do. The evidence, the mounting evidence, the criticality of quality sleep. And it's quality sleep that's really important, by the way, here.
Not time in bed.
You know, your REM sleep, your deep sleep, where you're restorative, your body is doing the restorative things it needs to do to itself, cleansing, etc. That's so important. And so anything that is getting in the way of sleep is definitely going to be a massive contributor to greater feelings of anxiety.
Yeah, definitely something to pay attention to.
So, definitely pay attention to your sleep. And if you do use some sort of wearable, then try and, you know, after like a few months, you'll get some norms for yourself. And then these tools will measure against your norms. Yeah. And, you know, so you can get you can actually see whether or not, I've had less sleep and I'm feeling more anxious. I'm having more sleep and I'm feeling less anxious. Note to self. All right, get more sleep. Go to bed earlier, you know, with less alcohol as well. Yeah. I came across another technique the other day, again, doing this course with Paul McKenna. And something I've never heard of before was called Havening. There's a Havening technique, which is, of course, it's a sort of a combination of self-soothing. And again, it feels a bit warm, but you're actually rubbing the outside of your arms. So if you think about, you know, when you're soothing somebody. Yeah. So it's a combination of using this sort of self-soothing technique, a counting technique, a visualization, and eye movement. Again, not professing to be an expert on this. I don't know much about it.
That sounds interesting. They say it's disrupting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a friend of Paul McKenna, a doctor that devised this particular technique. And again, scientifically proven to reduce anxiety. And the amazing thing is it's very, very quick. We're talking 4 or 5 minutes.
Wow.
And you will experience a reduction in your anxiety levels. All these things are great by testing. You know, if somebody is in a really anxious state and then they use these techniques and then suddenly 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, they've gone from a 9 to a 3.
Yeah.
It works. And that's what
and different techniques will work for different people.
Yeah.
So we're just offering a range of different things that people can use.
And that's the point, isn't it? Really we're saying, Lisa, is you don't you don't have to have it. You can do something about it. And by learning these techniques and applying them and trying them out, you can experience a relief from that extreme anxiety that's stopping you doing what you want to do.
And listen, I have suffered with anxiety, you know, for a long time, and these techniques do work. And the relief and the freedom that you feel being in control of it rather than it controlling you is so powerful.
Yeah.
So try some of these techniques.
I mean,
they work.
As I said before, I'm not a person that suffers a great deal with anxiety. However, life kicks up circumstances and different things happen, and everyone will experience anxiety at some point. And my experience is that when I have had it and I've used these ideas, it really does work. Yeah,
they're useful things to have in your toolkit. And I think the other thing to explore is and we have done this a little bit, but that sort of thing that we're talking about in terms of managing the thoughts that you have. I heard it described, actually, it's a bit like, do you remember the Generation game? When we were younger, and there's all these in terms of the thoughts that you choose to have. So on the Generation game, the conveyor belt at the end, there's some great prizes, and then there's a booby prize. But it's trying to train your brain that you pick the good prizes, not the booby prize. You want not your thoughts, and you have a choice as to the ones you choose to focus on, and give yourself the best chance by focusing on more positive stories rather than these catastrophic ones that we have the tendency to do that manifest themselves in feelings of anxiety.
Yeah, on the basis that the brain can't hold, it's very difficult for the brain to hold 2 opposing thoughts at the same time.
Yeah.
If you can train your brain to orientate itself towards something which is more positive, brighter, more optimistic, for using self-talk, you have to trigger this by using self-talk. Back to what the story you're telling us of, what phrases are you using? Are you catastrophizing in your own mind by saying lots of what-if statements? What if this goes? What if this? What if they don't like me? What if they don't accept me? What if I'm unpopular? What if I don't wear the right thing? Or just whatever it might be, or say the wrong thing. Why don't you just play some what ifs the other way around?
Flick them.
What if they do like me?
Yeah.
Just again, remembering your brain, left to its own devices, will normally navigate towards protecting you and being negative. We then have to get in the driving seat, take control of our system, our cognitive system, by utilising these different techniques. But specifically here, we're talking about using active, positive language. It might feel a bit weird. You might not feel like saying it. And that's really, because if you've got a negative thought in your head and you're trying to say something positive, you're probably boo-hooing your own positivity.
Yes.
All right, that's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
So you have to persevere with it.
Yeah, because the thoughts only have power over you if you to the extent to which you buy into them.
Exactly.
So over time, you need to train your brain to buy into the positive thoughts and not the negative thoughts.
Yeah. So, you using active language, active rehearsal, visualization. Yeah. Pay attention to what you are focusing on. So I remember this lady, we were both speaking at a conference. I'd say she was probably in her mid to late 20s. And I introduced myself and I said I was the guest speaker. And I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm doing a marketing presentation. My marketing managers, put me up for it because they can't be here. So I'm doing the presentation. And I know she was walking around, head down, wringing her hands together, And when I spoke to her, she just looked a bit of a train wreck, to be quite honest with you, right? And I thought, if she goes up on the stage looking like that, I think she's going to go into meltdown and choke, etc. So I was having a bit of fun with her. I said, look, okay, I am a professional speaker. I'm used to going on these stages and doing these sorts of things. So it's a little easier for me. You're not doing it all the time. It's not your day job. So remind me, what do I need to do to feel like you're feeling now? I just sort of went, what do you mean? I said, well, teach me how to do it. What do I need to do in order to feel as anxious as you? Get me to where you are. Remind me how to do it. So I said, okay, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what are you actually saying to yourself? Can you think about what you're saying to yourself inside your head?
Yeah.
She goes, oh, yeah. I said, well, what's that? She goes, well, I can hear my manager saying, this is your big opportunity. Don't let me down. I thought, well, that's not particularly helpful. All right. Manager. Not the most positive, encouraging statement. Yeah. So I said, okay, well, why don't we change that? Because that's not a good mantra to play in your head. How about saying, I bet they're going to love this. All right. I bet they're going to love this. I've got some great things to tell them. I said, by the way, have you got some good things to tell them? She goes, we've got some great things to tell them. We've got a new promotion, we've got some new material, we've got a new campaigns. I said, brilliant, this is great, fantastic. Is this going to be new news to them? Yes. How good a news is it? On a scale of 1 to 10, an 8 or a 9, fantastic. Right. So they're going to love this. Keep that phrase in your head, they're going to love this. I say, what else do I need? So what are you visualising? She goes, I can just see, some of the salespeople, we always have a bit of a fight with them, maybe not looking encouraging. There's one particular person. What's the person's name? What do they look like? I said, right, get that image out of your head. Who do you know in the audience is likely to support you? Right, so get that image, make it bigger. Make it on a big screen, like the only person you can see. And you get the general idea where I'm going here, right? So we do this whole thing. And I said, okay, what about physical body? Where are you feeling anxiety? Yeah. And she said, in my sort of chest and my stomach. Okay. So I said, okay, well, could we move it to your right toe? Imagine if you could just move it down your body, so it's like you're right, and flick it out your foot to sort of move it out. Could you just kind of move it down? All right. Maybe just move it all the way down. So I was just doing some different things with her. And I said, then I said, think about a time when you did feel really confident. Where do you feel that? Yeah. Oh, I feel it in my upper body and in my head. And I said, I was doing this whirling thing with her and rushing it round. And imagine it going around a cycle and it had a lovely colour. What lovely colour would it be? Bright, I think so, like a bright sort of rosy pink. So, by the time she's finished with this, she's gone from like a 3 to an 8. Now, when she goes on stage, is she super, super, super confident? No, but she was a whole lot better than she was. Yeah. And she was able to go and do it. So the point is, we're manifesting it, we're manufacturing it through what we're doing. And if we can recognise we're doing those things and you can change it, yes, you can very quickly change your emotional state.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a really powerful, and that brings things to quite nicely together in terms of techniques in the emotional, the physical, and the cognitive side of things. Everything that you covered there. And I think the final thing to touch on is how to desensitize yourself to some of these things over time. And as we said earlier, it is absolutely not to avoid them. You have to lean into these situations and give yourself the chance of creating very positive references about doing a presentation or about going into a crowd of people. You have to train your brain that you can be safe in those perceived scary situations.
So is the idea that the more you go there, the more desensitized it is when you're actually there. Yeah. That's what you're talking about here. Yeah.
Those triggering situations are desensitized over time because you replace the negative references with, the more positive references. Yeah. So rather than cementing a neural pathway that is an anxious one, you're cementing something, a lot more positive.
Yeah. I think the other thing, in terms of sort of moving away from, anyone listening to this who feels that, yes, I'm one of these people who gets caught up in this sort of anxious cycle trap. But number one, as we said, be kind to yourself. It's not a question of just flipping from one, being anxious to being mega confident.
No.
But if you could start with a goal to turn the dials down.
Yeah.
You know, well, today I've normally been at 8, I was at 7.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Journal it, make a note. Let your brain know that it had the ability to be able to change the state or change that feeling. Maybe you know, over time, you have less anxious sort of episodes over the course of a month. Yeah, less frequent or not as intense. And that's a sort of nice gradual pathway to self-healing. But be kind to yourself. Don't expect to sort of use these techniques and it just vaporizes.
Yeah, it's not like flicking
when
a
for the last
switch,
30 years, 40 years or whatever, you've been living with this feeling. I think it's just to start to say to myself, am I subject to this feeling for the rest of my life?
Or am I willing to be subject to it?
Yeah.
You know,
can I reduce it?
Or do I have a choice? And the answer to that, as we know,
Yes.
is absolutely
Yes, you do.
yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that pretty much brings us towards the end.
Yes, absolutely. And there's loads of resources that we've talked about and that we've got access to that we will link in the show notes, because there's just there's so many valuable resources in relation to this topic out there. And obviously everything that we've talked about we'll put into the power tool.
Good luck with it.
Yes.
Be kind to yourself, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Remember where we started this podcast by saying that, you know, the surprising truth about confident people is they still have anxiety.
Yeah.
And each of those people will describe their own little tools and techniques they have. So you're not alone. But I think just hold on to the belief that you can reduce it, if potentially over time to a point where you don't really experience it a great deal at all.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily even describe yourself as being an anxious person.
Yeah.
You actually describe yourself as a person who used to be anxious.
Yeah.
How about that?
Recovering anxious.
Yeah, I used to be anxious, but
anxious
I'm not
person.
so much now. You know, I've learned to deal with it over time, and you've given yourself the belief system that, you know, I don't need to live my life this particular way.
Yeah.
It's served me well, it's kept me safe, but I don't want to continue that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Good luck with them.
have fun with that and just play and be open to the idea. That's the other thing, is they're a bit weird, some of these ideas. They're a bit strange, but, you know, extraordinary results require extraordinary methods. You know, popping a pill is not the answer. Amazingly enough, I think we all know that Prozac or other similar anxiety-reducing drugs are the number one prescribed drug. It's the number one reason people go to the doctor.
Well, they say readily given
And
away,
sometimes you
aren't
do need that. I mean, I've been down this route with my sons, and you do need that for a period of time. But I am the firm belief that also with other techniques, you don't need to. And some of those alternative techniques, I'm just saying, are a little bit quirky and a bit weird. But run with it, try it out.
Judge by results,
And
as
judge
we
by
say.
results, and let us know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Next time, Lisa, what have we got?
flex to connect.
Flex to connect. Well, that sounds fun.
How to adjust your communication style and recognise and
one of my favourite subjects to talk about, and a real fun one as well.
Yeah, understanding and adapting to different communication styles.
Why are you the way you are?
Yeah.
Okay. Until next time, see you then.
Bye.